Hello everyone, my name is Christian Frommelt.
I'm Jenny.
And first we just want to thank you very much for coming out. This is something that Valentin put together. We thank him for that as well. Just a chance. And Marina, yes, thank you. It means a lot to us that you guys thought to ask us because what we're going to be doing is just kind of talking about our chance to learn about our local swing dance heritage and dance styles coming from St. Louis, Missouri. We probably wouldn't even be dancing necessarily if it wasn't for the chance to learn it in the specific way that we did. So what we're going to be doing is kind of be talking about our background from St. Louis and what we've learned along the way. There is kind of a disclaimer, you're not going to learn everything because we don't know everything. So it's mostly just a chance for us to talk about what we've learned, some of the theories or ideas that we've created along the way, and mostly just kind of give you a sense of what it's like to be a dancer from St. Louis.
So in kind of addition to the unique dance styles that St. Louis has, so you probably, if you've heard of this weekend, heard of St. Louis Shag. There's also some unique jitterbug steps that only St. Louisans do, or that really came out of St. Louis. But I think one thing that really sets St. Louis apart, or one of the reasons why these styles are so well preserved, is unlike in other American cities, in St. Louis there has been this continuous history of swing dancing all the way since the jazz era, since the 20s, 30s, 40s. In a lot of American cities, the dancing was really popular everywhere in that time during the big band era. But then later in the 50s and 60s and 70s even, it just kind of died out. So in many major American cities, people were doing other types of dances. They were doing disco or whatever, but there was no sort of ongoing jitterbug history that has been so well preserved. And in St. Louis, we can really track the history of the jitterbug all the way from the 20s and 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and still all the way today. So that's kind of what we're working with. That's our starting point, is that we're lucky to be born into a city that has this unique history, and it's been really, really fun and special for us to get to explore it and to get to know some really close personal friends through this process, friends of all ages, from people of our own generation all the way up to people in their 60s and 70s, all the way up to people who were almost 100 years old. So for us, it's more than just about the dancing, absolutely about the personal connections that we've made as well. Before we start just throwing information at you, I will say we're a small enough group here that if at any point you can't hear us or you want us to repeat something or something like that, just call it out. We're pretty informal, so this can be a conversation too, and we will definitely leave time for you guys to ask questions if you want to.
Yep, at the end we'll give you a chance to ask questions about the information that we've shared, but like Jenny said, if there's something that we can clarify or if you need us to slow down at any point, feel free to do so. Don't hesitate. We want you to get something out of being here. So let's go ahead and get started. We decided to approach this from the starting point of kind of introducing how we got to learn the St. Louis dance styles. Instead of saying like in 1925 so-and-so did this dance and then it moved on, and instead of going chronologically through time, we thought it actually made a lot more sense to start with how we learned about the St. Louis styles and then kind of go from there.
Yeah, and in that way you can go through the process that we have in uncovering just a little bit of information at a time about this dance.
Indeed. So we learned first dancing separately. I learned to swing dance first in 2007, and it was in Iowa City. I was going to a school in the Midwest United States where St. Louis is. But it was a small town, and I went to a college swing dance club, and that's where I learned my first dance steps. And sure. I'm originally from St. Louis, but I first learned, what you might expect to learn at a basic swing dance class. I learned the Charleston, I learned a little bit of collegiate shag, but it wasn't until I returned to St. Louis in 2008 that I started learning about the local dance traditions in St. Louis.
Yeah.
This is helpful, actually.
Except I can't read anything. Oh, here we go. So this is St. Louis here, and Christian's college was in Iowa City, which is about 5 hours by car, 4 hours by car when we drive fast, to this really small town in Iowa. And just geography lesson. St. Louis is right in the middle of the country, and it's relevant to point out that it's on the Mississippi River. So here's New Orleans, and the Mississippi runs right here through Memphis. I think that's Memphis, somewhere around there, and then up through St. Louis. So that's where we are.
Almost exactly between Chicago and
Yes.
New Orleans.
Close.
Exactly. It's like halfway up. Chicago's right there. So yes, exactly. It's situated in a unique place too in the city. I'm sorry, now I'm totally going off track, but kind of the history of jazz, we think of it as originating in New Orleans and traveling up the river right here to St. Louis. So anyway, that's where we are.
And especially culturally, it's kind of in between New Orleans and Chicago. So before you brought up the map, I was just saying that I started dancing in 2007. It was just a college scene, nothing too special about it. I moved back to St. Louis in 2008.
And then along came me. Christian and I met in St. Louis. We went to the same university, and we lived actually in the same apartment building. And so we became friends, and Christian was like, hey, I do this thing, it's swing dancing, and I'd never heard of it, but it sounded cool. So I joined him for some swing dancing out in St. Louis, and that's how I got started.
Yeah, and the person who really inspired us, just generally about dancing, was a man named John Bedrosian. In fact, he was probably, aside from me, probably one of the first people that you learned any dancing from. And we started to realize there was something a little different about the way this guy danced compared to, especially where I learned to dance. And we also had a few friends who had known him longer and had some knowledge about St. Louis dancing, who would kind of tell us about how special he was. And so we were really watching him closely, started asking him questions about what it was like to dance in St. Louis, what it was like to do the St. Louis Shag. He did his first dancing in the late 50s. He was dancing to rock and roll music. He was dancing to Chuck Berry. He was dancing to Ike and Tina Turner. But he was doing swing dances. And his story is pretty interesting because he was a young person when he started dancing in the 50s, but he became really interested in the dance, and he started looking up to people who were about 10 and 15 years older than he was. So he was dancing with some old school jitterbugs, primarily in the 60s and 70s, and I think it gives his dancing kind of this old school quality, if you will. And to give you a sense of what inspired us, we're going to show you a quick video of his dancing here. So we're going to show a lot of clips. I think that's extremely useful. And so this is to give you a sense of what it was like to be young dancers going out dancing in St. Louis and seeing this guy who really stood out.
That's a special move.
And we can't even repeat what he just said.
So that's John Bedrosian dancing, and his partner is Valerie Kirchhoff. And she is better known now as Miss Jubilee. She's a singer in St. Louis and has a band, so is very, very popular in the States for that reason. Also, one of the most amazing and unique dancers who I know. In this particular clip, and in some of the clips you'll see of her, she was just learning this stuff from John. So it gives you, an idea of how great she was, but also keep in mind that she was being shown some of this stuff for the very first time. And so I wanted to make sure we point that out too, because a lot of times we do talk about the men and talk about the leaders, but followers are very important too. And so, like Christian was saying, when we started dancing in St. Louis, John was kind of one of the first characters that entered our lives, and he's become very special to us, of course, as a teacher and a mentor, but also as a very close friend. We've had a great opportunity to get to know him, and has been really, really generous with his willingness to share his knowledge about dancing with us. So, like Christian said, he's one of the ones who taught me most of my very first steps.
Yeah, and in fact, he would take me on little driving trips and show me all the places that he used to dance, which goes much further than the steps themselves, which is something that not only with John, but with a lot of the other people that we've spoken to, who we've gotten to know, made dance much larger than just the dance. And so I think that's worth pointing out too. He was telling us about, the streets, the places, the people, the things that kind of broadened what dancing actually was for them.
Can I say one more thing?
Please go ahead.
So, and one other thing about John too is, of course, we met him through friends and on the social dance floor, and later learned that he was just super well known as a jitterbug champion. So, Johnny B is a well-known figure in the St. Louis jitterbug scene, has trophies that are as tall as me in his basement, and we'll tell you more about that too in a minute.
Yes. So, I want to start kind of establishing more of what the St. Louis tradition of dance is, the tradition that John came from, and the one that he passed on to us. Along with St. Louis style swing, and we're going to pick things out of the dancing a little bit more as we go on, but first we're just going to kind of give you an overview, if you will. This is, what it's like for John to swing dance, okay? But of course, alongside with that, in the 1960s, again, it was rock and roll music, it was soul music, even R&B music that they were dancing to. They were applying these older dances to the newer music. Part of that social dance tradition, even at that time, was the St. Louis Shag, okay? The term shag, this is the first thing I want to say, the term shag in the US was a very general term for dancing, okay? So if you're a dancer, you probably know what collegiate shag is, and that's usually what we think of when we say shag. But in St. Louis in the 30s and 40s, no one was calling it St. Louis Shag, they were calling it shag, okay? Because it was just a term for a dance that young people were doing in the 30s, and it was widely used. Perhaps you've also heard of Carolina Shag, which is actually, from the beginning, more of just a local form of jitterbug. It's also called shag. So I wanted just to kind of clear that up a little bit. There's nothing necessarily related about the shags apart from that name that was generally used, okay? So if you were a dancer in the 30s and 40s in St. Louis, you did the shag, which we now call St. Louis Shag. So this was another thing that John was picking up in the, probably as early as the late 50s, but definitely in the 60s and moving into the 70s. And so we're going to give you a sense of what that looks like from that time period. goes back into some swing.
So this is a common thing with John and the other St. Louis jitterbugs who we've met, is that the St. Louis Shag was not necessarily a separate thing. It was just a part of their jitterbug. So within a dance, they would do some jitterbug, then they would do some shag, and then they go back into their jitterbug. And so even though it's tempting to categorize it in a separate way, and it is a different footwork pattern, it was very much a part of this sort of bigger set of movements that they would use.
Yeah, I think, today we think about these categories like Charleston and Lindy Hop and collegiate shag, but yes, it's definitely worth pointing out that it was just dancing for these guys, and shag and jitterbug were things that they passed in and out of.
Mm-hmm. But also, when we do run into older jitterbugs from earlier generations, whether many of them were just social dancers out and about dancing, but they'll see us on the someone else on the dance floor and say, oh, they're doing the shag. It was very much a part of your vocabulary if you were a dancer in St. Louis. It's just something you learned as part of your upbringing.
Yep. What we want to do now is just further give you some context for what it was like to dance in John Bedrosian's time. And then we're going to use that as a chance to keep moving back in time. Because John's mentors were mostly 1940s jitterbugs. Okay, they were a generation ahead of him, but that's really the style that he's coming from. And I think we're going to start with Jim and Lorraine Burns. Okay, if you're learning about the St. Louis styles of dance, Jim and Lorraine are right at the top of the list. They were considered to be the best in the 40s and beyond, and I think they certainly enjoyed that. I think they really liked winning. They were very competitive, and these were some of the people that first really influenced and inspired John. All right, so we're going to show this clip of Jim and Lorraine. This is also at Club Imperial. We'll talk more about Club Imperial and its place in St. Louis dancing. But what we're going to see is that they're doing a St. Louis style of swing. They're doing a 3-wall swing out. They're doing a special type of swing out that was fairly unique to the St. Louis dancers, and we'll kind of talk about that a little bit more. But then they go into their version of the St. Louis Shag.
They have really good outfits too.
This is in the 70s.
So, fun fact about that clip, when you hear the announcer say, "Dance on a cross, Jimmy," when we first watched this, we thought that he was just kind of cheering him on or encouraging him. But what we learned was that they were actually supposed to be exiting the dance floor, but they were really enjoying the spotlight, so they stayed out there, and so you'll hear the announcer says, "Dance on a cross," and then he tries to announce the next couple, and then he says it again, and they're still staying out there, which is lucky for us, because now we have this nice longer clip of them dancing, but that's a funny thing about that clip for us.
Yeah, so again, I think they enjoyed being in the spotlight. I remember hearing from John Bedrosian that when he actually beat Jim and Lorraine in a contest, he was in the restroom at Club Imperial, and Jim Burns comes in, and he's like, "You can't beat me," or something like that, and he like smashes the paper towel dispenser, and he's all angry and stuff.
Yeah, but all these guys, I mean, there was this really old school, and this is something that's not just in St. Louis, but we noticed it in LA too, like this old school, like really competitive spirit where everybody was like, they were each other's friends, like they really cared for each other, but on the dance floor it was all about who was the best. So.
Yeah, I mean, if you've ever really gotten intense about sports, then maybe you can kind of relate to that. But yeah, it was pretty competitive. We're going to watch some of the oldest footage that we have of St. Louis dancing. Sadly, it's only from 1959. We're going to keep going back in time as we talk, and we're going to be talking about some of the 30s and 40s jitterbugs. But again, just to give you an idea of where we're coming from via where John was coming from, we're going to show you a clip of Club Imperial in 1959. So these are teenagers, these are young people. They probably learned to dance from their cousins or their brothers and sisters. Maybe they learned to dance from their parents. This is not stuff that they were learning in a dance studio, okay? It was something that they were learning, again, from family members and friends. So it has that same tradition of a street dance, of the same way that you would have learned it in the swing era.
Mm-hmm. And Club Imperial has a unique role in the history of jitterbug in St. Louis. It's what the style of dance that is done in St. Louis, the style of jitterbug is still called Imperial style swing. And so we'll watch this clip and then we'll talk a little bit more about how the club owner really positioned himself as a marketer for the dance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is from a TV show that the club owner put on. Okay, so just the fact that there's footage of this was to promote Club Imperial. It was to get people into the club. Okay. And the other thing I'll say, it's from a larger clip where there are also scenes of the band. This is a clip that our friend Dan Connor edited. Dan and Val were with each other for a long time, so Dan was also someone who knew John Bedrosian long before us and was kind of doing some of the work that we're now doing before we were.
Mm-hmm. And Valerie is the dancer you saw with John in those first clips.
That's George Edick. He's the club owner.
And now what they call the Imperial style. Rock and roll style.
And again, they're listen to the music they're dancing to. It's not exactly what you'd think of as swing music. Dance to this.
Okay, so here's some kids dancing at Club Imperial. We have a few steps that we'll point out to you guys, steps that are really characteristic of the St. Louis style. Before we do that though, let's just talk a little bit more about where they were getting this information, because like Christian said, the kids in this clip, teenagers, were learning these dance styles most likely from brothers, sisters, cousins, parents, neighbors, whoever it was. But Christian also discovered that George Edick had this marketing thing that he did to attract older jitterbugs to his clubs, where he would hold these master level competitions.
Yes, so the clip of Jim and Lorraine that we watched, I'll just pull up an image so you can kind of remember.
These guys with the pants, the white pants.
Yep, so again, they were kind of like the reigning champs of St. Louis Jitterbug. A lot of these dancers were brought back into the fold in the 1970s when George Edick decided to host a contest, an annual contest, and kind of bring back the older style. And part of that was another contest, kind of like a junior showcase, where the younger dancers could interact with the style, with the old school dancers. And so that's an element of, I think, what made this kind of continuous lineage or progression happen in St. Louis.
Yeah, so by holding these master level contests, the club owner essentially brought in the older dancers and all these young kids who are picking up on the rock and roll tradition. Now, instead of just seeing what's current and what's modern, also see what the kind of the generation before them was doing with their jitterbug. So they're connecting the older steps with the newer music, which is why we get teenagers dancing jitterbug to rock and roll music.
Yeah, which in itself, that was pretty common throughout the U.S. To be borrowing dances and steps from an earlier time period. But to kind of illustrate this point of the interaction between the generations of dancers, we're going to show another clip, which is from the same TV show in 1959, but it's of a couple that belong to that earlier generation, that kind of 1940s swing tradition in St. Louis. So the show starts with these youngsters dancing to Ike Turner and his Rhythm Kings, and they appear throughout the show. But there's also a scene in this TV episode where Teddy Cole, who was a jitterbug champion, also from Club Imperial, and his partner Joe Richards do kind of like a showcase. And I think what you'll see, compared to the clip that we just watched of the younger dancers, they have a look that belongs more to the swing era from the 30s, especially the 1940s. So we're going to watch that now, and again, we will kind of capture what we consider to be the St. Louis style, but I think what you'll notice is that they also have steps that all the other dancers in the clips that we've shown also do.
Yeah, I think actually it might be helpful if we just show some of those really quick,
Okay.
so you can look for them. So a few things to watch for. This is a little show and tell for you. So one of the most common things you'll see through all these clips is a certain way of doing swing outs. We call them 3-wall swing outs. It would look something, so like in a regular Lindy Hop swing out, we go around once, so like one, ba-da, ba-da, lots of different ways to do that. But in the 3-wall swing outs, they're going to do it still at 8 counts, but they're going to trade roses twice, so so you'll see them do this. You'll also see them do it in more than 8 counts where they redirect multiple times. So they'll do it over and over. And then another move that you'll see that the kids did in this clip, and you'll probably see other dancers too, is the St. Louis.
Go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say the St. Louis walk.
Let's do the swivels
Okay,
and the stop
we'll
reverse.
back it up one.
So we just did the 3-wall swing out, which if you were a jitterbug in the 40s and 50s in St. Louis, that was your swing out. Okay, that's how you did a swing out. And then often they would close this off with what we call a stop reverse, which went into what the St. Louis dancers knew as swivels.
Yeah, so in Lindy Hop, we call these swivels, right?
Yeah.
St. Louis dancers were doing like this.
So now you're doing a few 3 walls, and then the way you're going to close that off is with a stop reverse here. You're going to take that back in the other direction.
These are swivels.
And this is what was known as swivels in St. Louis. And there's lots of variations on this idea, but so we have the 3 walls, the stop reverse, and the swivels. These are characteristics of the St. Louis jitterbugs.
And one more for you, which is the St. Louis walk. There's some different variations, but a basic version.
Yeah, and if you are a Lindy Hopper, if you're a swing dancer, you probably are familiar with jig kicks, or the concept of the jig walk. In St. Louis, what was known as simply as the walk was kind of their version of doing a jig walk. Looks like this.
This is a really kind of basic version. They would also do some where they would do like little pushes or twists. That's a John Bedrosian special right there. Woo, sorry. Yeah.
Okay. I think that has happened, with the exception of Jim and Lorraine, I think that has happened in every clip that we've shown. That was another characteristic of the St. Louis jitterbugs.
Yeah, and just to give you an idea of how prevalent this is, sometimes when we go out to ballrooms in St. Louis, I'll dance with an older person who was of an earlier generation, and they'll start to try out their moves a little bit, and then they'll go into the walk, and people will be like, "Oh, you can walk." So it was part of their consciousness as jitterbugs. So let's watch Teddy Cole.
Yes. So hopefully with that little list of moves, you can start to pick out Teddy and Joe doing it in this next clip. Again, this is right next to the teenagers dancing, but a couple that's a bit older. There's some 3 walls. There's a funny little mistake.
So this is the walk. So again, here's Georgie Dick, and we won't watch it, but you can go back and watch this later. It's really funny because he can't breathe from dancing that hard, and he's
he's trying to talk, he even says, I can't breathe. And Georgie Diggs is asking all these questions, and that's good for a laugh.
We've all been there, right?
Oh, indeed. So again, I actually don't know how old these two are in this clip, but they're most definitely kind of in line with Jim and Lorraine. They're coming from the 40s. But as you can see, they're dancing to Ike Turner's band. This is rock and roll, and they're doing a lot of rock and roll styled swing. But I think at the same time, the way that they use each other and kind of the overall quality is from the earlier period. And for us, that's kind of the best that we have is these clips of the older dancers. Later on, to kind of give us an indication of what the dancing looked like in the 40s and perhaps even the 30s, but
Yeah.
that's even more mysterious.
So we can use our imaginations a little bit. The style of the music, which is rock and roll, as opposed to what they would have been listening to earlier, swing music, probably impacts their quality of movement a little bit. Age might too, I don't know. So, or maybe they were dancing just like that earlier. We just don't know. So a lot of what we're doing is taking little pieces of information that we have and piecing them together. But overall, we have a kind of a map to follow more than anything else.
Just because of the time, maybe we should start talking about Tommy Russo.
Yeah, I think we should. Let's show Kenny. Just show him.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll just mention really quick Kenny Wetzel, who was a dancer from St. Louis, who later moved to the West Coast, to California. He was doing St. Louis Shag and St. Louis style jitterbug. The clips we have of him here are both of him dancing in LA, right, on the West Coast.
Right.
So this is after he left St. Louis, but that was where his upbringing was. He's a pretty well-known figure in the jitterbug scene of that generation in general. So like when we've talked to Sylvia Sykes, she knew who Kenny was. And so I think it's worth just looking at some of his clips.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Anyone know who Peter Loggins is? Some of you. He learned St. Louis Shag from Kenny Wetzel. Okay. And I think let's show this one. Yeah. And so Kenny had a style of his own, but he does three walls in this clip, his version of the three walls with Marianne Nunez, and then they go into a shag sequence that they did very commonly in performances and in jam circles. And there's some like funny modern Westy stuff in here to start off with. Like I wouldn't consider that St. Louis thing necessarily. I believe this is in 1986.
There's the shag.
Yeah, you can tell he's pretty amped up. Well, just for this one funny moment.
So there's Kenny. We didn't know him, but we've heard a lot about him. And like Christian said, he knew Peter Loggins knew him as well, and so his influence in the St. Louis Shag. Even before we started learning Shag, Peter was talking to Kenny and learning what he knew from him. So
Absolutely. So, and he was another. His early life is really a mystery to me. It's a mystery to Sylvia Sykes and Peter Loggins. All we know is that he was from East St. Louis, Illinois, which is across the Mississippi River from St.
I'm
Louis.
not gonna bother with the map, doesn't
And then took the St. Louis style of dance to California, where it also enjoyed some popularity, even into the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, one year we watched, one of our friends had this DVD that had the winning routine from the US Open, which was a big jitterbug championship contest back in the day. It still happens, I think, but it's
Yeah,
not
it's more of a West Coast event now.
But they used to have a jitterbug division, and one of our friends had this DVD of the winning routine from every year, and I think we started in like 1980 maybe, and went all the way through 2005. And there was a long period where almost every jitterbug routine that won had a little bit of St. Louis Shag, and it was often fast, and it was something that they would break into, and the crowd would love it. So it definitely was, and that's a West Coast, or it's in the West Coast, that's where that competition is.
Yeah, and the St. Louis Shag sequences that these dancers were doing were borrowed pretty directly from that sequence of dance steps that Kenny and Marianne just did in Shag. So, you know, we started with how we got into it. We're like meeting John Bedrosian, who's just this badass dancer. We start asking all these other questions, and it leads us to Jim and Lorraine Burns and people like Teddy Cole and Joe Richards, and the weekly dances that were happening at Club Imperial. And as we started investigating more and kind of digging deeper into the history of the St. Louis dances, our friend Dan Connor, the one who posted this video, and Valerie Kirchhoff, the woman who's dancing with John Bedrosian in the first clip, and another friend of ours, said, you had to meet this guy, Tommy Russo. He was dancing in the 1930s, and he's still around. So they had interviewed him a little bit. They had talked to Tommy Russo, and they just found him at a public concert, an outdoor concert during the summer, and he was in his 80s at that time. And then they started asking him all these questions. There was no reason that anyone would know who Tommy Russo was as a dancer. They just kind of saw him. They're like, oh, we're dancers too. We're hungry. We want to learn more. And so they start asking this 80-some-year-old Tommy Russo about dancing. It turns out he won hundreds of contests in the late 30s. He was performing on floor shows in nightclubs. He was doing swing and a little bit of tap dancing in nightclubs. He was training girls to dance on chorus lines, and he kind of made a little career out of dancing in the late 30s. And he also has a whole scrapbook of newspaper clippings and pictures that kind of back up all this information that he told us. So we're like, well, we need to meet this Tommy Russo guy. So in 2010, and they didn't even have his phone number. I searched Tommy Russo on the internet, and I think I didn't even call him. I sent him a letter, and then thankfully his daughter responded to me, and that's how I was able to go and meet him. He was 94 years old when we first met him, and it was just like discovering a gold mine, you know, a treasure trove of information, because pretty much all of his friends had been dead by that time. And from what I can tell, if you would want to talk to one person from that time period, it would be Tommy Russo. And so we're so lucky to have the chance to get to know him and talk to him. And so we're just going to kind of give a short biography of Tommy Russo and tell you about what he taught us about St. Louis dancing.
Yeah. So we'll show really quick some pictures from when Tommy was young. And the way we kind of learned a lot from Tommy was not so much through video clips like we're showing you, but through these pictures that he had cut out from newspapers in the 30s and kept in a book. And so we could see the pictures and then we could hear his stories. And of course, anytime you're hearing a person's stories, you have to understand that there's going to be elements of imperfection or personal interpretation or whatever. But to us, that just adds to the richness of this history, is that it's been given to us so personally around a kitchen table over dinner with Tommy and his daughter, and really making a friend, not just getting facts from somebody.
Yeah. I think probably the most special thing about Tommy Russo is that I think he's about as close to the source of these St. Louis styles of swing dance and St. Louis Shag as you can get. He was born in 1916. That's a long time ago. It's 100 years ago. He was born in September 1916 and grew up in a very poor Sicilian neighborhood in downtown St. Louis. He learned his first dance steps in the 1920s from his black neighbors. He had black neighbors who would dance on their porches in the evenings, and he started watching them as a young boy. He was probably up to no good, looking for something to do, and he started asking them about the dance steps, and he told me the first dance steps he ever learned were the Charleston and the rubber legs. So that's why I think it's really neat to learn from Tommy Russo, because he was dancing into the swing era. Everyone else that we've been talking about was kind of coming out of the swing era, but he was there. He was a pioneer of these dances, and he did the bulk of his dancing in the mid to late 30s, right around the time that this photo was taken. This is in 1938. This was 6 days after he turned 22 years old, and he's dancing to Benny Goodman in this photo. Let's look at some other photos,
Yeah,
and then we can...
I don't really know what order they're in, so this might be a tour. Okay, so here's another photo of Tommy with the same partner. Her name was Ruby Kindred, and yeah, this is them in a contest. The description says they're taking a high kick, which is a funny explanation, but this would have been from a big jitterbug contest, probably. I don't know if they won this one or not, but it's Tommy.
Yeah, and you can see this is something you would see anywhere.
Yeah, imagine
in
the famous
US.
jitterbug photos that you know, and this is one from
Right.
St. Louis.
Yep.
What do we have next? Oh, that's me and Tommy. When he was 95, he came, this would have been 2011, 2012?
Something like
Maybe 96. He came to the Nevermore Jazz Ball, which is our festival in St. Louis. You might have been there this year, actually. And later we'll show, or we'll probably finish with a video of Tommy actually performing at our event.
Yeah. Oh, and then this is the original Casa Loma Ballroom. This is actually just a few blocks from where we live. We still dance at the Casa Loma Ballroom. It burned down in the late 30s, but they rebuilt it right back up. So we dance in the new version of Casa Loma, but this is where Tommy Russo would have been dancing a lot of the time in the 30s. He said he danced every night, twice on Sundays.
Yeah, and he used to, they were 2 dances on Sunday, so there was like a tea dance in the daytime and then a dance in the evening. And in order to avoid paying twice to get in, they would go into the bathrooms and stand up on the toilets and hide until whoever was cleaning the place came through, and then they would just walk right back out like nothing happened.
Yeah.
We got to hear through Tommy's family, especially even after he died, at his funeral and everything, lots and lots of stories about him. He was an incredible character, and yeah, had a mischievous bone in his body for sure. He would get up to trouble quite a bit, I think. And another thing that they would do, I think, this was Tommy who told us, is that he and his friends would dress up really nice and stand outside the ballroom, and before the dance would happen, and all the girls were coming in, and they would act like they didn't have money to get in, and so the girls would say like, oh, well, aren't you coming to dance with us or whatever, and they'd say, yeah, we don't have any money, and so the girls would give them money to get in, so they would give them money, and then they'd put it in their pocket and wait for the next one, and be like, yeah, we don't have any money to get in, and so the girls would give them money and then put it in their pocket, so.
Yeah, and I think for Tommy, he really didn't have any money, at least when he started asking, but he was like, yeah, after a while I had like $1.50 or so. You know, it's probably only like 10 cents to get into the dance. But yeah, the stories go on, and like we mentioned earlier, that's really important to us. I think it's something that we don't get enough of in dance classes today, and so we definitely cherish those memories.
Yeah, and just so you can see, this was the Casa Loma that Tommy was dancing in. It burned down and was rebuilt. And this is the Casa Loma that we dance in. This is what it looks like on the inside today. I don't know how confusing this will be, but just to give you an idea of how connected this community is, street from this ballroom, and we'll show you the outside as well. So across the street from this ballroom, so it's like I'm standing on the corner looking across, is one of our very favorite bars called Yaki's, and it's owned by the nephew of one of the famous jitterbugs that's in our playlist. So within these little neighborhoods in St. Louis, there's this really interconnected history that is fun to be a part of for so many different reasons.
Yeah, it's one thing that kind of keeps pulling us along is just to hear, oh, that was my cousin or that was my uncle. You know, it really is cool. But let's talk. I know, do we have to end like right away, or can we say a few more things? Keep going a little bit? Okay. If anyone leaves because it's officially the end time, we won't be offended. Let's talk about the Shag for a moment. First, while we're talking about Tommy Russo learning to dance, I think it's really important to mention that he held the black dancers in St. Louis in the highest regard. He, again, learned from black dancers originally, but he also competed against black dancers in kind of a big recreation center. In the ballrooms, it was whites only, and blacks were not allowed in those ballrooms. That includes the Casa Loma ballroom. And the African American dancers had their own ballrooms. But there was some interaction between particularly the immigrants, especially the Italian immigrants, like Tommy Russo, and the black dancers. And so that's another key component to Tommy Russo's story for me. For a lot of the other dancers that we watch, they were learning from other white dancers, and in fact maybe didn't even look kindly on other black dancers. For Tommy Russo, because of that closeness, again, he held them in the highest regard, and the black dancers were the best, in his opinion. So I always like to point that out.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. I mean, if we were looking at the history of black swing dancing in St. Louis, I think we'd be following an entirely different line.
That's
but
right.
Tommy was kind of probably one of the only ones who was going back and forth between the two. So that's a little bit of connection that we have for Tommy Russo. So we're going to talk about the St. Louis Shag, and this is a clip of Tommy at age, he's probably close to 90 here, I would guess.
Yeah, he's probably in his, he's probably in his like mid-80s here.
Maybe. He's up there. Anyway, he's pretty old in this clip.
Yep.
And this is him dancing with Valerie, who's the one we saw dancing with John. And he's going to do what he can of the jitterbug and a little bit of St. Louis Shag.
Yeah, and then we'll probably start closing off with some thoughts on the St. Louis Shag.
It's a silent film.
Just like the ones Tommy Russo used to watch.
Yeah.
So
Jig kid.
there's a little, jig kick variation.
Kid. teaching. So there's like one good one that, I mean, it's all good footage, but there's one basic in there in particular that you can really see what he's doing, and maybe you can go back to it. But he's going kick, step, bump, bump, triple step, kick, step, hold, rock, step, triple step. You'll see, they're going to start.
Yeah, so this is pretty much the only footage of Tommy Russo doing shag that we have. Yeah.
And then I think he's trying to show Val something else, but we don't know what.
So, just a little bit about shag and trying to connect all the pieces. We've always known that St. Louis Shag has generally been considered an offshoot or a descendant of the Charleston, but I think this little clip of Tommy Russo really starts to illustrate that, because again, if you, what we commonly known as Charleston would look like this, right? And what Tommy Russo is doing, he starts with an inside kick and he goes kick, step, and run, trip, step, kick, step, and run, trip, step, kick, step, and run, trip, step. And then what he starts to do is go into these inside kicks, right? So he was doing things that did resemble our swing Charleston, and the best that we can do is theorize about how everything is connected, but it seems definitely possible and even probable that the shag that was being done in St. Louis, which we now know as St. Louis Shag being its own thing, was perhaps a swing era equivalent to the Charleston in St. Louis.
And so we see Tommy doing this version of the basic where he does kick, step, and run, triple step. You also see that with Jim and Lorraine. You see John do basics like this. You see Eddie and Dottie, who we didn't watch yet, do it as well. And it's a basic that we learned as well, and one that Peter Loggins learned from Kenny Wetzel. It has a lot of similarities. A basic that looks like this: triple step, kick, step, stop, run. Same thing, except they're really doing their runs backwards like a rock step.
John Bedrosian, who he showed us the St. Louis Shag basic as what we call the all-triple basic, which is
Triple kick, triple step, kick, and
very stationary. Okay?
kick.
But even John Bedrosian has a basic that looks like this.
Yeah.
So I think with the little pieces that we have, we can maybe start to connect things and create a bit of a lineage. With Tommy Russo as the starting point, then a giant gap, and then primarily the 40s jitterbugs dancing later in time. We can't forget that their dances were evolving too. John Bedrosian is still making his own steps. He's still innovating on the steps that he knows. So it's not like we're watching Jim and Lorraine just jump out of the 40s and they're all of a sudden in the 70s. They were going through all of these eras as dance as well.
Yep, and this is a, 10-second actual dancing clip of Tommy when he was in his late 80s versus all the dancing he was doing, years and years and years of dancing in the 30s. So this is like one random snapshot that we happen to have. I do want to say that we also, Tommy couldn't dance much by the time we met him. He was 95. But we would show him things and say, oh, did you do this? Or did you do this? And he would say like, no. Or like, yeah. He would correct us or whatever. And we did show him a basic triple step kick, the all triple basic. And we were like, did you do this? And he was like, yeah, totally. Like we did, that's the shag. We did that too. And so We don't know. We don't know if he meant like, yeah, that's how we did it in the 30s, or we did both, or we did the run version in the 30s and the other one later. We're not sure, honestly, which one came first or what's the most original. The fact, or what we do know, though, is that they were all done, and they're part of this lexicon of movements.
Yeah. The other thing, and this can start to be a closing thought, is that, when we were interviewing Tommy Russo, I was like, did you do the Suzy Q? Did you do Fall Off the Logs? Did you do, cross steps? Did you do the Big Apple? Did you do Lindy Hop?
You should hear him talk about the Big Apple, by the way. Side note. Okay.
I was asking him about all of these dance steps, right? He's like, yeah, I did all of them, but we just went out and danced, And the mentality was totally different, and that includes the later dancers too. But he's like, yeah, I would go out and do the shag, I would go out and do the Big Apple, but it was all just dancing. And I think that also goes for what he identified as shag. It was more of a collection. There was a basic, but it was also just a collection of variations that was very general. For example, we already talked about going into this step, right, these consecutive kicks, but within his shag, he also did this jig kick variation that we saw earlier. He also did these runs like this, okay? Those are all things that we're not seeing John Bedrosian do necessarily in that way, or the later dances. And I also think that connects it to what was generally happening in the US during the late 30s. And so I think the idea of the shag in St. Louis, much like the shag in other places, was like, oh, they're doing the shag, but it was generally what the young dancers were doing. And from there, I think it became more of a specific thing that we see with the other jitterbugs.
Mm-hmm. So there are a few steps or fundamental patterns that have been very, very well preserved and passed on through the generations. Like everybody does the Fall Off the Logs where they hold hands and do this thing, like across the generations of dancers that we see. So there are some steps and patterns that are really, really there, but it's likely, what Christian is saying, is that in the 30s, when the young kids were just starting to do this, that pool of movements that counted as the shag was probably much bigger, or different, or diverse.
Right. So, there's a few things we know about St. Louis dancing.
There it is, yeah. And there's more that we didn't look at, some fun stuff. I think the one thing that might be a little bit out of nowhere on this playlist is if you watch this STL Bop, and you can actually just turn it on while I talk about it because it's fun. So we talked a little bit about how if we were looking at the white dance history and the black dance history, we'd probably be following two different lines, and that's still true. This is from a bop contest, a St. Louis bop contest in just a couple of years ago, and we've kind of gotten to know some good friends in this community, and we're at this competition. The bop dancers, Markwa, this woman who we met, considers Lindy Hop the grandfather of the St. Louis bop, and so the paths kind of met and diverged and met and diverged, but that's another part of St. Louis dance history that we wanted to talk about because it's no less important. In fact, just as important, just as awesome. It's just totally different from what we know.
And much lesser known because
Exactly.
Black dancers weren't on TV, frankly. But yeah, we watched the clips of Club Imperial. There's an Imperial swing today that's very slow and groovy, like a West Coast dance. The equivalent for Black dancers, because again, it was segregated, was the bop, and now this is what those same dancers are doing and call the bop. So yes, that's a nice thing to point out.
Yes. So the rest of this playlist is available. We watched a lot of it, but it's on St. Louis Swing Dance History on Christian's channel, and we'll make sure to send it to you guys. Any closing thoughts you want to make?
I think that about does it.
Yeah, so there's a quick dive into St. Louis history. Again, super important to us as people and as dancers. I think for, like Christian said, for both of us, dancing wouldn't have had the same hold on us that it does if it weren't so closely connected to our home and to our people and everything. And so for us, this is just as important as the steps that we're going to be showing you guys tomorrow. So,
Yeah.
so thank you for listening.
Yeah, and also it's a work in progress, so we're going to keep learning and we'll keep you posted.
Yes, totally. Yeah, thank you guys. And I don't know if we have official time for it, but we're always happy to take
the library
questions.
is closing at 10 o'clock. But
Okay.
now maybe somebody has any questions.
That's what we
Yeah,
were going to
yes.
say, yes.
Thanks.
Yeah, maybe
Go
some
ahead.
question about club, about Imperial and Casa Loma.
Uh-huh.
Is it the biggest club in the St. Louis? Is it for the swing dancers in 30s and 40s?
So there were so many ballrooms in the 30s and 40s. I mean, every neighborhood had a ballroom, had a place to dance. And Casa Loma was probably the most popular ballroom in South St. Louis. I just found an advertisement today that said that it could accommodate 3,000 people. And it was very common to have 1,500 people in Casa Loma 5 nights out of the week. So that was a very popular one, but there were others. There's one called the Arcadia Ballroom, which is kind of in the central corridor of St. Louis. There were ballrooms on the north side, and Tommy Russo talked about going to all of these different places. And I think, Casa Loma had dances most nights of the week, but other places maybe only had dances 3 nights a week. So similar to what we do now, we're trying to look at the dates and figure out which dances we want to go to. These dancers had a much larger selection, but they were probably doing the same thing. And they're like, Count Basie's going to be at the Arcadia Ballroom. And at the Arcadia, they would book bands for 5 days in a row. And so they would kind of pick and choose from all the wonderful options that they had. For Club Imperial, that was originally Imperial Hall, and it was a dance hall in the late 1920s already, and it just would have been a slightly smaller place where you could go dance to swing bands. In the